Hello, everyone. This is Focus on English. Today, we'll be exploring the topic of escape the B1 to B2 English plateau.
There is a very specific, um, deeply humbling kind of frustration that hits you when you're learning a language.
Oh, absolutely.
It's that moment when you realize you can flawlessly order a cup of coffee,
Yeah.
right? You can ask for directions to the train station or, successfully navigate a transaction at the bakery.
But the second someone asks you for your opinion on a recent movie,
Yes.
or you try to make a nuanced, sarcastic joke at a dinner party.
Total paralysis.
Right.
Your personality just vanishes into thin air. You go from being this witty, complex, articulate adult in your native language to sounding like, well, a very polite, slightly confused toddler.
It's the worst feeling.
It really is.
Yeah.
You know enough to survive, but you are completely unable to express your true selves. Linguists actually call this the B1 level. It's the classic intermediate stage. Like, B1 means you can survive a weekend trip to London, but B2 means you can actually defend your political opinions at a pub in London without, breaking a sweat.
Yeah, and it is the universal language learning trap. You are well and truly stuck on the intermediate plateau.
Right.
The steep, exciting progress you made as a beginner just sort of levels off, and suddenly you feel like you're just treading water.
And I know so many of you listening right now are intimately familiar with that exact feeling.
Yeah.
Your English is, okay, but the leap to great just feels impossible.
It feels like a massive wall.
Exactly. Well, to figure out how to bridge that massive gap, we've pulled together some really fascinating research for this deep dive today.
We have a lot to get through.
We do. We're looking through everything from a peer-reviewed methodology study out of the Euro Global Journal of Linguistics to the private weekly study diaries of successful polyglots to some highly specific linguistic roadmaps on breaking that B1 to B2 plateau.
And the goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is to extract a foolproof, science-backed blueprint to move your brain out of that frustrating intermediate limbo. And crucially, we want to do it without relying on rote memorization or, burying you in dense theoretical grammar books.
Right, because nobody has ever achieved fluency by just sitting down and reading a dictionary from A to Z. It just doesn't work.
Not at all.
Because the sheer volume of what you need to learn at this stage is really daunting. To jump from that B1 survival mode to B2 conversational fluency, you need to expand your vocabulary massively. We are talking about building a working vocabulary of roughly 4,000 to 5,000 words.
Which is huge. And that word working is really the linchpin here.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a working vocabulary means you don't just recognize the word when you see it written down. You can actually summon it instantly in the middle of a fast-paced conversation.
Ah, right. Recall.
Exactly. And you cannot build that kind of rapid recall architecture through flashcards alone. The human brain just doesn't retain isolated data points effectively. It needs context, it needs narrative, and it needs a framework to hang those new words on.
Which brings us to a major pitfall that I saw highlighted across all this research.
The immersion myth.
Yes. When intermediate learners realize they need this massive influx of context, their first instinct is often to just dive headfirst into the deep end. They queue up a rapid-fire, slang-heavy podcast designed for native speakers thinking, I'll just immerse myself, I'll absorb it by osmosis.
Right. It is an incredibly tempting shortcut, but neurologically it backfires almost every single time.
Really? Why is that?
Because if you jump into an audio environment where the vocabulary is entirely alien and the pacing is native speed, your brain simply gets overwhelmed. The cognitive load is too high.
So you just tune out.
Exactly. Instead of carefully processing the language, your brain goes into survival mode.
Yeah.
It stops trying to parse the individual words and simply reclassifies the entire podcast as background noise.
Oh, wow. So you're completely missing all those new vocabulary words because you're just drowning in the audio. It's like you can't pick out the individual puzzle pieces because someone dumped the entire 5,000-piece box on your head all at once.
That is a perfect analogy. Precisely. This is why the linguists advocate for what they call the Goldilocks approach to input.
Not too hot, not too cold.
Right. You have to find audio that isn't too easy, where you learn nothing, but isn't so hard that your brain shuts down. The magic number for cognitive adaptation is about 80% comprehension.
I really love this concept. At 80% comprehension, you understand the vast majority of the narrative. You know who the characters are, you know what the topic is, and you aren't lost. But there is still a 20% gap of unknown words and phrases.
And that 20% gap is exactly where the learning happens. Because you understand the surrounding 80%, your brain has enough contextual clues to actively guess the meaning of the unknown words.
Which forces you to think.
Exactly. You are solving a puzzle in real time, which creates a much deeper neural pathway than simply looking a word up in a dictionary.
It makes me think about lifting weights at the gym.
Oh, sure.
If you walk in on your first day and try to bench press 300 pounds, the weight is just overwhelmingly heavy. You drop it, you get hurt, or you just get discouraged and quit entirely. That's the native level podcast.
Right. It's just too much.
But on the flip side, if you just lift a 2-pound dumbbell every day for a year, it's too light. Your muscles are never challenged, so they never grow. You need that 20% of resistance to actually cause the micro tears in the muscle fibers.
That's a phenomenal way to visualize it.
Because just like muscle fibers need that physical strain to grow back stronger, your brain needs moments of linguistic failure. That 20% of unknown vocabulary to trigger the release of the neurochemicals that signal your brain to adapt and remember.
Yes. That 20% resistance is the necessary friction for cognitive adaptation. So, practically speaking, what does a Goldilocks podcast actually look like?
Right, because finding that sweet spot is tricky.
It is. But the guides we looked at pointed to a few standout examples. One is a massive show called Stuff You Should Know. The hosts, Josh and Chuck, have over 2,000 episodes on everything from the history of true crime to how Barbies are made.
I've listened to them. They're great.
They are. And the magic of their show for a B1 learner is the pacing. It's conversational, it's naturally engaging, but they take the time to explain concepts clearly, which naturally slows down their cadence.
Yeah, and for learners who want something even more precisely calibrated, there's the Culips ESL podcast. I was looking into their catalog for this deep dive, and it's brilliant.
Oh, I've heard good things about that one.
It's actually designed and hosted by professional English teachers, but it doesn't sound like a classroom lecture. They have hundreds of episodes covering everyday slang, modern idioms, and just natural banter.
That sounds perfect.
It really is. It feels like you're just eavesdropping on two friends having coffee. But those friends are secretly engineering the vocabulary to sit right in that 80% comprehension sweet spot.
But, here is the inherent limit of the Goldilocks audio. Listening only trains your brain to recognize the sounds of the language in real time.
Okay.
It helps immensely with the rhythm and the prosody, but it doesn't give you the visual architecture of the language. Audio is fleeting.
That makes sense. Once the word is spoken, it's gone.
Exactly. To actually build the structural scaffolding for those 5,000 new words, to lock in the spelling and the complex grammar, you have to freeze the language in place.
Which means we have to talk about reading. And this is where that study from the Euro Global Journal of Linguistics completely changed how I view studying.
It's a fascinating study.
It really is. They took 120 intermediate language learners and divided them into different reading groups to measure what actually moves the needle on vocabulary acquisition. Because it turns out, just staring at a page isn't enough. How you read completely dictates what your brain retains.
Yeah, the methodology of that study is incredibly revealing. They tested 3 distinct strategies. The first group was assigned extensive reading.
Which is basically reading for pleasure, right?
Right. You take a large volume of text and you read it quickly for the general gist without stopping to analyze every sentence. And as you might expect, this group saw massive improvements in reading speed and overall conversational flow.
But the second group did intensive reading. And this is the opposite approach. They took much shorter, denser texts, and they analyzed them meticulously. They dissected the grammar, they looked at the sentence structures, and they translated the unknown vocabulary.
And the data showed that this intensive reading group demonstrated the most explosive vocabulary gains by a wide margin.
They absolutely did. Though it is worth noting, this study also had a third group, the interactive reading group.
Oh, right, where learners read a text and then actively debated and discussed it with others.
Exactly. And while their vocabulary gains weren't as sharp as the intensive group, they maintained the highest levels of long-term motivation and engagement.
Which is also crucial for not quitting.
Very true. But I have to push back on this intensive reading idea on behalf of anyone who has ever actually tried to learn a language.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the study proves that intensive reading builds the most vocabulary, does that mean I'm supposed to sit down with a novel and stop every 5 seconds to consult a dictionary? Because honestly, that sounds miserable.
It is miserable.
It totally ruins the magic of the narrative. The linguistic study itself even flags language anxiety as a major roadblock. Reading a book with a highlighter in one hand and a translation app in the other sounds like a fast track to giving up entirely.
And that is the central tension of the intermediate plateau. It's the friction between enjoyment and rigorous studying. If an activity feels like a punishment, human psychology guarantees you will eventually abandon it.
Exactly.
But the breakthrough here is that you don't actually have to choose between the pleasure of extensive reading and the vocabulary gains of intensive reading. You can manipulate the environment to get both, using something called graded readers.
Yes. I was actually looking at the British Council materials we pulled, and they use graded readers heavily. Initially, the term made me think of children's books like See Spot Run, but they're remarkably sophisticated.
They really are. They're essentially books or short stories where the author has artificially restricted the vocabulary and the grammatical complexity to match a specific linguistic framework, like the B1 level.
So the themes are mature.
Right. The narrative themes are complex and meant for adults, but the structural delivery is carefully managed.
Like the ones we saw on the Learn English platform. There was a sci-fi story about a time travel plumber and a contemporary drama called True Beauty.
Those are great examples.
The plots are genuinely engaging, so you get invested in the story. But because the author already knows you are a B1 learner, they purposefully only introduce a very small percentage of new, challenging words.
Exactly. They are artificially engineering that 80-20 Goldilocks zone in text form.
Ah, I see how that connects.
Because the cognitive load is so carefully managed, you can practice intensive reading, taking the time to look up those few strategically placed new words without losing the joy and the momentum of the story. You are hijacking the brain's desire for narrative to deliver targeted vocabulary lessons.
I love that. So if we synthesize this so far, we've got our Goldilocks podcast playing, and we're reading our time-traveling, plumber-graded readers. We have the perfect input.
Right.
But taking the language in is only half the battle. If you just passively consume this material, your progress will stall. You have to actively process it, which brings us to a technique from the guides that honestly sounds like a covert CIA operation.
Oh, the shadow technique.
Yes, it's called the shadow technique.
It sounds mysterious, but it's grounded in hardcore motor cortex training. When you listen to a language, you are only engaging the receptive pathways in your brain. To build true fluency, you have to engage the productive pathways.
So how does it actually work?
Here is how shadowing works. You put on your Goldilocks podcast, but instead of just listening, you repeat what the speaker is saying aloud in real time, just a fraction of a second behind them. You are mimicking their exact pronunciation, their cadence, and their intonation. You follow their voice like a shadow.
I have actually tried this, and I need to warn everyone listening right now. It feels absurd.
Oh, it's very strange at first.
It's incredibly awkward. You're basically lip-syncing in front of your living room wall, trying to nail the exact rhythm of a podcast host talking about true crime. But as weird as it feels, it is a neurological secret weapon.
It really is.
Because you aren't just memorizing vocabulary. You are physically forcing the muscles in your face, your tongue, and your jaw to adapt to new phones. You are building muscle memory for English sounds.
It engages what neuroscientists call the phonological loop. You are hearing the sound, reproducing it physically, and then hearing your own voice make the sound. It binds the auditory information to motor functions.
That is fascinating.
But this level of active processing requires intense, undivided focus, which leads us directly to the most common trap intermediate learners fall into.
Let me guess. The illusion of multitasking.
Yes. The illusion of multitasking.
Oh, this is the part of the research that personally attacked me. We all do it.
No.
We think we are being incredibly efficient by putting on an English podcast while we're folding laundry or washing dishes or commuting to work. We call it immersion.
It feels productive, right?
Right.
But cognitively, it's incredibly inefficient for learning. Multitasking fundamentally divides your attention.
Because your brain is busy.
Right. When your brain is managing the physical task of washing a dish or navigating traffic, it cannot dedicate the necessary resources to encoding new linguistic data. To truly transfer a new word from short-term exposure to long-term working memory, you have to hit the brakes.
You literally have to slow down. One of the guides was adamant about this. Take your podcast app and drop the playback speed down to 0.8x. Pull up the written transcript on your screen, and most importantly, keep a physical notepad next to you.
And that physical notepad isn't just a suggestion. It's a mechanical necessity.
Why physical, though? Why not just type it on my phone?
Because when you physically write a word down with a pen, you are combining visual processing, seeing the word on the transcript, with haptic, motor feedback from your hand. You are forcing multiple areas of your brain to coordinate, to recreate the geometric shape of the letters.
Wow.
That combined sensory input burns the memory significantly deeper into your neural pathways than passive listening or even typing ever could.
Okay, so we've optimized our input. We are intensely reading, we're actively shadowing our podcasts, and we've stopped trying to learn English while simultaneously cooking a 4-course dinner.
Yes, no more multitasking.
The language is going in effectively. But now we arrive at the final frontier, the most terrifying hurdle for anyone stuck on the intermediate plateau.
Output. Actually opening your mouth and speaking.
Yes, moving from the safety of the screen and the notebook out into the real world. And the challenge here isn't just doing it once. It's building a sustainable system that survives long after your initial motivation fades.
Because motivation fades quickly.
Notoriously fickle. But habits endure. To figure out how to structure this, we dug into a personal study diary from a working polyglot, and their core philosophy revolves around this concept of snackable learning.
I love that term. Snackable is the perfect framing. When people decide they want to improve their language skills, they often plan these massive, exhausting 3-hour study sessions for a Sunday afternoon.
Right, the binge session.
Exactly. But cognitive fatigue sets in after about 45 minutes, and the rest of the time is largely wasted. A focused 15-minute daily routine triggers neuroplasticity far more effectively than a weekly binge session. Consistency always beats intensity.
Let's actually walk through this polyglot's weekly architecture because it's incredibly practical. They designate Mondays for low-friction listening practice. 10 minutes of YouTube.
Just 10 minutes.
It's just 10. The diary specifically recommends channels like English Addict with Mr. Duncan, which is very calm and explanatory, or Speak English with Vanessa, which is formatted to feel like a casual chat with a friend.
And the choice of YouTube here is deliberate. When you are listening to a podcast, you only have auditory cues. But video provides rich visual context.
Like seeing their faces.
Right. You see the speaker's facial expressions, their gestures, and their physical environment. Those visual anchors give your brain secondary clues to decode the meaning of new words, which makes the vocabulary much stickier.
The polyglot actually used a great analogy in their notes. They said, if a 2-hour Netflix movie in English is a heavy, intimidating, full-course meal that leaves you feeling exhausted, a 10-minute YouTube video is a buffet of delicious little snacks.
That's very true.
You get a taste of the language without the overwhelming commitment. Then, moving on to Tuesdays, the routine shifts to app-based practice. They use apps like Busuu for microdialogues.
Which is brilliant for fill-in dead space.
Exactly. The brilliance here is utilizing the dead space in your day. You do a 5-minute language boost while you're standing in line waiting for a coffee or sitting on the subway. You weave the language into the existing margins of your life.
But then we reach Wednesday.
Ah, yes.
Wednesday.
And Wednesday is the crucible. Wednesday is dedicated exclusively to speaking.
This is where the friction is absolutely highest. I know so many B1 learners who can understand 90% of a complex movie, but freeze when they have to order a sandwich.
Like a completely different skill.
It is. But here is the massive logistical problem for most people. How are you supposed to practice speaking if you don't live in an English-speaking country? We don't all have a native speaker sitting in our living room waiting to gently correct our verb tenses.
Historically, that was a massive barrier. But the modern solutions to this are genuinely revolutionary. The most effective strategy we found in the current research is utilizing artificial intelligence.
This part is so cool.
You can use the voice interaction features on platforms like ChatGPT to simulate incredibly realistic conversations. I was blown away by this application when I tried it. You aren't just asking it questions, you are prompting it to run immersive role plays. You can literally speak into your phone and say, act as a highly critical interviewer for a marketing job and ask me tough questions.
Or act as a frustrated waiter in a busy restaurant and I am going to try to send my food back.
Yes. It is brilliant because it completely removes the affective filter.
Which is so important.
Right. Because in linguistics, the affective filter is the emotional barrier, the anxiety, the fear of judgment, the embarrassment that prevents learners from speaking freely. An AI isn't going to roll its eyes if you use the wrong preposition.
It won't judge your accent.
Exactly. It provides a psychologically safe sandbox for you to stumble, make mistakes, and practice outputting the language in real time.
And if you don't want to use AI, or you just want to keep it totally analog, the diary suggests the absolute simplest method. Just talk to yourself.
The mirror method.
Right. Stand in the mirror and narrate your morning routine out loud. Summarize an article you just read to your empty kitchen. Just get the words out of your mouth.
Just make noise.
Yes. The polyglot wrote this incredibly vulnerable note about this in their diary. They said that when they were tackling their fifth language, they actively avoided speaking for months because they hated sounding clumsy. And they called it the single biggest mistake of their learning journey.
It's a mistake born of perfectionism.
Hmm.
We are so used to being competent adults that the temporary incompetence of speaking a new language feels unbearable.
It hurts the ego.
But you have to force yourself through that incompetence as early as possible. Yes, it will be messy. Yes, you will use the wrong tense, and yes, it will feel intensely awkward. But embracing that exact messiness is the only biological way to break the speaking barrier. You have to be willing to sound foolish today in order to sound fluent tomorrow.
That is the ultimate truth of the intermediate plateau. Communication is fundamentally about human connection, not grammatical perfection.
So let's pull all of these threads together into a cohesive strategy for you, the listener. If you are feeling trapped on that B1 plateau, here is your science-backed blueprint to break out.
First, stop jumping into the deep end. Find your 80% Goldilocks zone. Seek out conversational podcasts where you understand the vast majority of the narrative, but you are still forced to actively decode that remaining 20%.
Second, rethink how you read. Extensive reading is great for flow, but you need intensive reading to build that 5,000-word arsenal. Grab a graded reader, embrace the time-traveling plumber, and use the restricted vocabulary to your advantage to manage your cognitive load.
Third, eliminate passive listening. Engage your motor pathways with the shadow technique, and recognize that multitasking is an illusion. Hit the brakes, slow the audio down, and physically write the new words down to lock them into your neural pathways with haptic feedback.
And finally, build a snackable system that relies on consistency rather than frantic intensity. 10 minutes of visual context on YouTube on Monday, micro dialogues in the grocery line on Tuesday, and brave the AI role plays or the mirror for some delightfully messy speaking practice on Wednesday.
And perhaps most importantly, reframe how you view the plateau itself. Feeling stuck isn't a symptom of failure.
No, not at all.
It doesn't mean your brain isn't wired for languages. It is simply a developmental milestone. It is a signal that your brain has successfully mastered the foundational architecture, and it is now demanding that you shift gears from passive absorption to active, targeted friction.
It's not a brick wall. It's just a gear shift. We have covered a massive amount of ground today, from the nuances of intensive reading to the psychology of AI role plays. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, slightly philosophical thought to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We started this whole conversation by talking about that unique frustration of losing your personality when you speak a foreign language. That feeling of becoming a polite, one-dimensional toddler. And naturally, we assume the ultimate goal of all this studying is to sound exactly like a native speaker, to perfectly translate our native language self into English.
It is the assumed endgame for almost every learner.
But what if that is the wrong goal entirely? What if the real magic of breaking through the intermediate plateau isn't achieving perfect native-like fluency so you can be exactly who you already are? What if the real reward is discovering a slightly different, entirely new version of your own personality? A version of you with different cadences, different humor, and different perspectives that only gets to exist when you speak in a different language. Think about who that person might be the next time you look in the mirror to practice. Until next time.